Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, beloved Master, Paramhansa Yogananda, saints of all religions, humbly we bow to you all. Fill our hearts with the joy of your living presence. We are your children. We offer ourselves in complete devotion to your guidance. Make us instruments of your love in all that we do. Om. Peace. Amen. Please be seated. We're gathered together, those of us who love Master and love God, to celebrate this extremely auspicious occasion of March 7th, which was the day that Master left his body in Los Angeles, California, in the middle of a banquet after he finished reciting a poem. It was a life interrupted by any normal human standard. You know, that there was a crowd, they had certain expectations, everything was going in a certain way, and then right in the middle of it, Master stopped his heart and fell over dead. I mean, it was extremely disconcerting to everyone present. It absolutely spoiled the party, just like you couldn't imagine. And yet, it was the astral moment, everything converged, that the preordained last breath was taken, and then once that last breath was taken, the soul just exited like that. Swami talks about it in the path. It's so touching. Master had told him to write down his words, and it wasn't the common practice as it is now for people to be recording, and recording existed, but the equipment was very bulky, and so it wasn't like with such a personality like it would be now, where it would be audio recorded. So Swamiji's notes were really what, and Dayamata's notes, were what kept the record of Master's words. So Swamiji had been invited to the banquet at the Biltmore Hotel. You've all seen the photographs. And he was sitting there, and he had gone in the company of another of Master's disciples who was not a monk, who didn't live in the ashram. And Swamiji was listening to Master, but he was mostly watching what he was writing. He wasn't looking up. And then, so Master reached the last line of the poem, and then there was this long, drawn-out sigh, and then Master toppled over. It's hard for us to remember that this body that seems to have so much life force is entirely dependent on the presence of the soul within it. That the moment the soul withdraws, this becomes as inanimate as the scarf I'm wearing. You know, if this were not around my neck, if I just take it off of my body, which I can't because of the microphone, but if I were to take it off of my body, you know, when you see it, I mean, it's sort of a silly demonstration, but you know, it looks like something. But as soon as it's gone, it just becomes nothing. And so Master was completely there, talking and speaking and giving this poem, and then he withdrew. He stopped his heartbeat, but really his soul just went wherever it would go, and the body fell to the floor as limply and with as little animation as the scarf falls to the floor when I decide I'm not going to hold it anymore. So as Swami tells it, everyone in the room just gasped. I mean, it was a spontaneous reaction. They're listening to him talk, and then he falls like this. And Swami is not watching. And he looks up and he says to his companion, "What happened? What happened?" And the man says, "Master fainted." And Swami's reaction, it's very touching, is that Swami said, "No, Master didn't faint." He knew immediately that Master was gone. Did he feel it in his heart? Did he know it intuitively? But the way he writes it, he said, "It's too perfect a departure." And oddly, Swami says, the forgotten playwright in me just saw the perfect drama of the moment and realized that Master had fulfilled his own prophecy. I will die talking of my India. And so he did. I am hallowed. My body touched that sod. And it's described, sod became a long, drawn-out sigh. And then he left like that. In retrospect, everyone could see that the end was coming, but in the moment, it was completely by surprise. Shivani asked Swamiji once at a satsang that was going on, how did you feel when Master died? And Swamiji was, by nature, was so forthcoming as a rule. And sometimes he would shock others of us by how freely he would talk about just anything, almost to anyone. Ananda used to own a restaurant in Nevada City called Earth Song, a health food store and cafe. And when Swami would go to town or in and out of taking trips, he would almost always stop at Earth Song and have a lunch or breakfast or dinner or whatever time it was, or at least a cup of coffee. And during the years when we were engaged in this litigation, when SRF sued us, and then when the reputation-destroying lawsuit came after that, and those were hairy times, and we were really caught up in things that were not congenial. And Swami, we'd have these big hearings in this area. They were either in Sacramento or they were in Redwood City. And then Swami would drive back to Ananda Village and he'd sit down in Earthsong. And he would just start chatting with the manager, with the waiters, with whoever was at his table, just about everything that was happening, to the point where finally the lawyers had to intervene and say, you know, you just can't do this. There has to be a greater level of confidentiality. But Swamiji himself, as he put it, I'm here to overcome my ego, not to protect it. Even I have realized in the course of writing this book I'm writing about Swami, that very often a small group of us were the first ones to hear Swamiji's ideas, insights, revelations, points of view in a private, more or less private emails. But as I went through year by year, there were very few things that he wrote privately that he didn't eventually write publicly. Because he just was, he was there to teach us, he was there to be with us, and he was not there to protect himself. However, when Shivani asked him, how did you feel when Master died? Swami said, that's a very personal question. Yeah, it was like very rare for Swami. Only a few times have I heard him say that. That's a very personal question. And then I think he just went into himself. And I don't know whether there was an interlude in between or just a pause of silence. But then he just turned to her and he said, it was heartbreaking. And then elsewhere, I recall reading about he went into seclusion, he went down to the desert, and he talked about that it took him a long time to recover from Master's absence. They were planning, Master was going to take him to India. He'd only been there 3.5 years. Master was, what, 60 years old? Teshwar lived into his 80s. You know, it wasn't in Swami's plan that his whole discipleship to Master in the body was Swami 25 years old. I mean, it's really quite something when you realize that he built his entire life, most of his life, he built after Master had passed on this very brief interlude of actual company with him. Now, on the other side of it, none of us were there. None of us ever knew Master in the body. And yet, many of us feel deep devotion and profound gratitude and an ever-living, present sense of guidance from a consciousness that we have only known out of the body, that we have only known in the ether. Swami said to us once, in many ways, he said, it's easier for you because you were never confused by his physical presence. He said his physical presence, which of course they loved, he said was also confusing because he was so natural. And Swami even said to me once, he said, Master was so adorable. He said, I couldn't really put that into the path. He said, I didn't know how to put it. I mean, I was presenting such a dignified picture of this great avatar. I just didn't know how to say he was the cutest fellow, you know. But he said he was, not in the sense of egoic charm, but just his childlike joy in everything just made him so charming. And, I mean, among the many things that they lost was that. When Durga Mata talked about getting the word in Encinitas that Master had left his body, and she talks about getting in the car with Dr. and Mrs. Lewis and driving up to Los Angeles and going to Mount Washington. And she talked about just so hoping that it would all prove to be a mistake and that he'd just gone into a deep state of cosmic consciousness. And they would find him sitting on the edge of the bed, swinging his little legs, is how she put it. And then she talked about his adorable, chubby little hands. You know, there was this, he aroused almost a maternal feeling in some of the, especially some of the women who were close to him, but Swami himself was touched by that. But he said it was so confusing to know that his consciousness was infinite and yet he was in the next room having dinner. He said, it's just, you all are spared, he said, that confusion. An interesting way to put it, isn't it? But here we are, and of course for many of us, or certainly speaking for myself, Swami Kriyananda showed me what it is to be a great soul, and through my experiences with Swami, I could understand Master. On one occasion I said to Swamiji, because often what he did not fit a conventional idea, of what anybody should do, especially a conventional idea of what, we thought he should do. And I said to him once, I said, if you act a certain way, it's because Master acted that way, isn't that so? And he said, of course. And I said, and if you refrain or have certain points of view about things, it's because that's how Master felt, isn't it? Again, he said, of course. And the point is very simply this: on what else would he model his life? And that's where it comes down to us. I know the first year that Swami moved to India, he moved in November, late November of 2003, and when March 7th of 2004 came, he was living in the ashram at 10 by 8. Some of the people in the room were living in the ashram with him at that point. 10 by 8 was the address, 10/8. That's what we always called that house, 10 by 8. And his apartment was on the upper floor. But immediately when he moved to India, Swamiji began doing this tremendous tapasya. He had double pneumonia and just one thing after another. He basically built Ananda's work in India through the penance he did with his physical body. Once when he checked in and out of this small hospital like it was a private hotel. He had his own room, everybody recognized him, they knew what he wanted, what he liked. And he was in that hospital once, and I happened to be there. I visited periodically, I never lived there. And he was just in his bed, and this Swami from Rishikesh, I don't recall his name, I never saw him before or since. The Swamis find each other. And this Swami from Rishikesh came to visit him in the hospital, and he said to Kriyananda, "Oh, I'm so sorry that you're ill." And Swamiji just laughed so joyously. "Oh," he says, "I'm just doing tapasya for our work in India. Don't give it any thought." And he was, near death repeatedly, but "Oh, I'm just doing tapasya for our work in India." Every great effort requires a gathering of energy, and often I asked him, after he said that, I said, "Tell me about this." And he said, well, every great hero and every great tale first goes off to do penance, don't they? To get the power or the magic weapon or the boon from the gods, depending on what story it is, because energy has to come from somewhere. So he was gathering that energy. But that first March 7th, he wasn't well enough to go up and down these flights of stairs, 3 or 4 flights of stairs. Eventually he changed houses because he just couldn't do it. So they had the event on the outdoor terrace, which was his apartment, literally opened onto the terrace. There were other entries to it, but it opened onto it, and he thought he might be able to get, from there to here, which was about the distance from his living room to where he would have to sit. And it was, of course, a balmy Indian night, as it is there. And they set the whole thing up on the terrace, just the magic way that we all Ananda people do it. And Swami thought he would speak for just a few minutes, and he started apologizing that I can only speak a few minutes, but he spoke an hour and a quarter. And he was sitting like this, and it was a full moon, and the moon rose behind him. This full moon came up over his shoulder like that during the time that he was speaking. And there were maybe 50 people there. And this is the very beginning of this extraordinary thing of Swamiji and his frailty, combined with his illuminated state. On such an occasion as the departure of Master from this world, and him being the only one who knew that story with his own eyes and with his own heart, sitting there with the moon coming up like this, and all the devotees, many Americans, some Indians, just watching him, watching the moon, looking at the sky. Where are we? What are we doing? And Swami's entire message on that occasion was a very simple one. Master is as much with us now as he ever was or ever will be. You know, there is one simple phrase that we simply have to remember. I think it was Swamiji who said to Master, when you are gone, will you be with us as much as you are now? And if it wasn't Swami, it was one of the close disciples who asked. Master said, to those who think me near, I will be near. To those who think me near, I will be near. And that phrase has two meanings. To those who believe and who understand that physical absence is no absence, then if you have that capacity to receive that which is beyond this world, you will receive it. To all who received him, to them gave he the power to become the sons of God. And the other side of it is the other meaning of the word think, which is if you draw me, if your consciousness, if our consciousness remains with Master, then that allows Master to remain with us. How simple it is. You know, the path is so simple. It's not easy because 1,000 vrittis of karma suggest themselves to us minute by minute by minute, making us think that we have something else to do. But we actually don't. We have absolutely nothing to do except to think Master near so that he can be near. That's all there is to it. All problems are solved so simply. You know, sometimes we have to fight our way through all sorts of other things. But in the end, in the presence of God, there is joy. And in the absence of that presence, there's a great big hole in our hearts. And that hole in our hearts drives us in all kinds of directions, only to make a giant circle through how many incarnations. Swami, one of Master's disciples, when Swami was there, had a vision of being Yogananda's disciple in Lemuria. Lemuria was like supposed to be 80,000 years ago. Swami, when he heard that, was horrified. Master, have I been your disciple for 80,000 years? And still I'm wandering in delusion? And Master said diplomatically, it's been a long time, that's all I'll say. Swami said, why? Oh, desire for this thing or that thing takes us away again and again. And it can't be helped sometime. But the moment we realize, whether it's a huge, byway we've taken for incarnations, or it's in the last 5 minutes, that we are no longer thinking Master near, and therefore we are not feeling him near, the solution is very simple. Shift our consciousness back. Live mostly at the spiritual eye, Master said. Come down a little as necessary to eat and perhaps talk a little with others. Then go back. It's not easy, but it's very simple. And the most powerful and important point to remember is that Master hovers right at the edge of our awareness. And all we have to do is just make the tiniest crack, and he rushes in. It's like we live in this deep sea bell, and the power of the Guru is pushing all the time. The tiniest crack in our sense of separateness, and God floods in. What joy, what joy, what joy. We will now spend the rest of the evening in music and poetry and inspirational many things. Whenever words appear on the wall, that's an invitation to join in. At the end of the evening, when we start singing Master's Love for Me, then you are invited to come to the beautiful altar, and there are 2 baskets of white rose petals. Please gather a handful of baskets of rose petals, and let them be your devotion, your service, your commitment to Master. Place them on the altar. So let's enjoy.